Hello, good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, all about creating an agile business with a mobile-first mindset. My name's Henry Pelser. I'm the head of pre-sales here at Paramount Platforms, and also joined by one of my colleagues, Leon Ashton Leatherland, who's one of our consultants, and we'll be your hosts for the next sort of 25 minutes to half an hour or so. So in the interest of time, let's obviously sort of jump straight into it. We're Paramount Platforms. For those of you who haven't worked with us in the past, just give me a moment for my slides to update. Our organization is sort of split into sort of three main facets. So we provide managed services to businesses around the desktop and the mobile space, which we'll be touching on today. And we're also a consultancy house. We provide lots and lots of professional services to help businesses kind of drive those strategic or technology-based mind points around everything around the EMS stack, as well as in the desktop estate, which naturally bleeds into today's conversation as well around mobile management, and everything is sort of nicely topped and tailed with a support services arm to the organization as well. So to really sort of offer a robust service around managed services, professional services, and then support services to help businesses along. Paramount Platforms is a growing business. Actually, the current device count there in terms of our managed service arms is a little bit higher than that actually. We're in the United Kingdom, but we do support organizations, as you can see, populating to the right here, and obviously a global stance as well. We're also part of Microsoft's EMS Elite Partnership Program, which kind of will again tie nicely into today. And obviously then we hold 3 gold and 2 silver competencies around cloud platform, data center, Windows and devices, enterprise mobility management, and data security. So in terms of what we're going to be covering today, nice and straightforward, wanted to kind of keep it really, really basic and make sure, we provide as sort of much information as possible to help the discussion today. So between myself and Leon, we're going to be looking at what it kind of means to have that mobile first mindset. What are some of the organizations talking to us about specifically around things like the leadership teams and so on. In conjunction with that, then, how this does create and add additional flexibility to the organization. And then towards the tail end of the session, we'll be looking at how we can simplify that process and then provide a holistic security view in line with that to obviously make sure that end users are safe, secure, and productive. A lot of the areas we tend to focus on around how we support organizations tend to start from a conversation with an IT leadership position. So a lot of the time, what do IT leaders come to us and talk to us about, specifically around things like mobile device management? One of the first things is obviously wanting to be mobile first. They want to provide agile services to organizations or platforms or people internally into the business to obviously make sure they have high levels of productivity and they want to keep things pretty safe. In conjunction with that, they want to make sure they leverage their existing licensing, and then on top of that entirely to make sure that the services they provide to end users are safe, secure, and scalable. How do they streamline this? So if you're looking to potentially do this for the first time or improve that service, usually it can be quite cumbersome. So a lot of the times when we talk to IT leadership teams, these 4 sort of talking points are sort of at the forefront of everything we usually discuss. So that mobile first sort of mindset around making sure we can get things to end users quickly. We want to make sure it's very straightforward and to adopt, specifically around things like new joiners, because one of the other things we're seeing is organizations are now starting to leverage talent from all around the planet. There's no more this sort of idea of sort of recruiting and hiring people within a 20, 30 mile radius of your office is these days quite gone. So how do you enable them as quickly as possible? Also want to use enterprise grade software. So existing investments typically around things like the M365, and they want to go towards things like Intune, that latest technology and offering sets to really enhance their capability offerings internally is obviously a must. And then the other thing, the whole purpose of this entirely is to obviously keep end users productive. But IT are massively challenged in making sure that the data and services provided on those devices for end users are kept safe. So your perimeter has actually shifted from the usual framework of a sort of person in an office with a firewall traditionally to actually this file has left the organization and how do I keep that file safe, and obviously falling into the wrong hands, because that's the new commodity. That's the new commodity these days, which is specifically things like data creation. And on top of that, you want to make sure that things are slick, reducing things like internal staff overheads. Specifically during the management side of things, we're also seeing a massive focal point for IT leadership in what they're trying to combat. But before you embark on this journey, what are some of the sort of key considerations that you have to think about? So the first thing is, how big is the problem that you're trying to solve? What's the purpose you're trying to meet? What's the business goal or the initiative you're trying to create when you are supplying end users with mobile-based devices? In terms of the problems we're trying to solve, right, identifying the purpose of mobile device management is very critical, right? So usually we see organizations adopt these in a wide range of scenarios, whether that's things like within a storefront, or for example, they need to make sure you have email on the person at all times, as well as then making sure that they have access to all of the relevant internal files from any device can be quite important. Plus, the way in which people are working is massively changing. People like to pick up their own iPad and so on, as well as then any devices they have near them to be productive anywhere, on a train, on a plane, and so on and so on. The other important consideration for IT is, what are you willing to support? So yes, you have mobile devices, they can be iPads and Android devices and iPhones and so on, but in terms of the applications and services you want to provide to end users, what do they look like and how feasible is it? And are you actually creating a rod for your own back by supplying access to something that you maybe can't fully control, and so on, right? In terms of BYOD, it means different things to different people. In the Microsoft sense, it effectively talks to mobile application management. From an Intune only perspective, for example, BYOD is typically or usually centered around the idea of, here's the Outlook app, for example. You can apply levels of security postures around that application to containerize data within it. Now, that application is supported across a wide range of devices, but what's IT willing to concede? What are the rules in which you need to access that for? And then also, where's the line? Where's the gray areas where the bits the business are willing to support? And as well as then from a corporate device strategy, may also influence the type of devices that you're looking to purchase. On top of that, then, there's potential limitations as well. So things like data use, remote access management, file security, encryption, a lot of considerations has to be made because you'll have different areas affecting different parts of your mobile device estate. So iOS devices needs to be treated sometimes differently to Android devices for a wide range of reasons, because the Android marketplace, so to speak, can have a wide sway in device capabilities. From a software perspective, you're usually fine. These things can sort of lend itself to be a bit more hardware orientated. What I'll do now is I'll kind of quickly hand over to my colleague Leon just to talk about what that mobile device service journey sort of tends to look like.
Thanks, Heinrich. So yeah, mobile device service journey, it's essentially what we kind of see as, what are the main phases in a mobile device's kind of life cycle. First of all, that's kind of starting off with the supply phase, which consists of a purchase and the supply chain fulfillment. So what are the kind of things to think about on this phase? What hardware you're going to deploy? It's kind of, how are you going to understand the types of hardware that are going to be the best fit for your organization? Which hardware is going to have the best experience for end users when enrolling? Then also considerations on how you're going to get these devices to your end users. There are various bulk enrollment programs that you could take advantage of, which we'll perhaps go into a bit more detail later on. Also, at this phase, what you have, does it support asset control? Then kind of moving on to enrollment, which consists of enrollment and access. Kind of in this phase, you've got to consider what enrollment methods are you going to use to enroll these devices, and they can be aligned to various use cases within the business. Especially in the Android space, there's quite a lot of different enrollment types that you can utilize, and it's just understanding which one is the best fit. As Heinrich mentioned earlier, how are you going to manage your BYOD devices? Are you going to manage them just at the application level? Are you going to mandate that the full device is enrolled into management? Then there's considerations on how utilizing these different enrollment methods will ease kind of resource on your IT department. Also, at the moment, what are you doing at the moment to enroll your devices? What have you got another MDM solution? Because at this phase, you may want to, may need to consider migrating from another MDM platform, and then access. In which scenarios are you going to mandate device enrollment? How are you going to evaluate your devices so that you understand how healthy they are? That kind of feeds into the enrollment too. Also, under the access phase, which platforms are you going to allow your end users to enroll? And in addition, how many devices are you going to allow your end users to enroll, which is just another consideration at this phase. And then it's moving on to the actual management phase, which consists of configuring, monitoring, and updating your devices. So, on configuring your devices, are you already deploying secure enough settings to protect your company data? Is what you're intending on using in line with the best practices of some of the guidelines from Microsoft or indeed NCSC? Also within configuration, what are your additional requirements? Do you want to brand the device? How can you brand devices? Some of the mobile operating systems will not allow this kind of thing. So it's just understanding some of the limitations in that area too. Also, it's a consideration of end user experience when kind of launching apps for the first time. What settings are available to pre-configure apps so that first sign-on experience to the app is kind of the best possible for the end user. And then ultimately under the configure phase, app deployment. What apps are you going to deploy? Are you going to have a set of core apps? Also, what apps do you want available in kind of a self-service facility in some of the managed stores that are available? Then sort of monitoring, we mentioned monitoring. What reporting is available within the Intune platform? How can you monitor integrations that are configured in Intune? And also under monitoring, your hardware itself. Is your hardware still in support? Is it still being patched? Are your devices still receiving security updates? Particularly in the Android space, it's quite difficult to keep a track of that kind of thing. And when's that hardware support likely to end? And then we finally come on to updating and indeed upgrades too. And this arrow here kind of indicates that this whole phase in itself is a process. So when you upgrade your device to a new version of the operating system, are there additional settings that we need to consider configuring? Indeed, in some instances, have there been settings that are there settings that you can no longer use? Have they been deprecated as a result of those upgrades? And then that kind of moves us on to the final phase, which we call resets, which consists of resetting the device and retiring a device. And this is kind of where you need to think about, well, have you got any issues? How are you going to deal with issues on devices? When you reset your device, how are you going to make sure that on a BYOD device, the data in the app is only removed and indeed not the full device wiped, which is a bit of a risk for personal data. And again, highlighting with the arrow that once the device is reset, kind of takes that device back to the beginning of the process again from enrollment. Gives you the ability to reuse your equipment where required. And then finally moving on to the retirement of the device. So what kind of mechanisms do you need to have in place to ensure that unsupported or faulty devices are retired? And indeed, does the process integrate end to end and support your whole process from procurement all the way through to the disposal of the device? That sort of covers the service journey process.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that, Leon. Appreciate it. So if we look in line as to some of the bits and pieces that Leon just mentioned there are some common gaps that tends to appear in any type of project motion when you're going through that journey. Some of the obvious ones to consider is, again, the service, right? We talked about that earlier. So working with us in terms of some of the services and solutions we provide is a case of making sure that service in itself is obviously fit for purpose. How are you going to take some of the considerations Leon pointed out earlier and start to obviously mitigate them, right? What is IT going to deliver to the business? The other thing then is around things like time, right? It's the most valuable asset we have, and it's especially important within the IT arena as well, because we need to make sure certain tasks are fulfilled in a sort of structured and sort of coordinated way. The biggest one of that being things like IT projects a lot of the time. So when it comes to the allocation and use of, for example, internal resources, How are they best spent? What needs to happen to those? Is it best to have them as part of a process motion, to think about things like the procurement side or the enrollment side, or is that better served actually kind of helping and supporting users, so to speak? So all of these things are considered in some of the sort of initial gaps we look at from an engagement perspective or from a project perspective to help manage and sort of make sure the relevant controls are in place going forwards. In terms of management then as well, right? We talked earlier around the time aspects and that, which massively ties into the management side of things in terms of who's going to be doing what are the expectations you're going to be sending to those users, right? From a corporate perspective, a corporate device perspective, what's the expectation of the experience coming back in? What does IT need to do to that device in order to get it to a corporate secure standard? The other thing to then think about are things like costs. IT can spend a lot of internal time and budget going down the sort of rabbit hole with a project and never sometimes get anywhere because there's so much complications involved in terms of things like device management, specifically around being very strategic in how you do that. So again, in terms of cost, as well as making sure that any sort of strategic direction IT chooses to take does make maximum sense, so that the right help is there to make sure that anything they do need to do going forwards is well managed, well proportioned, and IT isn't spending a lot of time in overtime, for example, sort of chasing dead ends. The other thing then is also making sure that with everything aligned, the right expectations are set and met by the business. So there's a couple of ways in which we can help with that. So in terms of some of the professional services, some of the common things we help organizations with from a strategic consultancy-led engagement is around things like configuring the iOS and Android devices themselves. If you have these at a corporate level, what can you do with them? What can you not do with them? One really important thing to note as part of this is that you are somewhat not limited, but definitely constrained by what is actually made available by the manufacturer. Seldom will, for example, a MDM-based tool provide you capabilities that physically just do not exist on the device themselves. The device you're managing is made by either Apple or the guys at Apple Mac. The services and stuff you can interact with on that device is bound by the manufacturer. It's IT's job to make sure the right things are on, in place, and ready for end users when they obviously need to work. One of the other things we talked about earlier, so configuring device protection policies, again, it's a really, really common sort of thing that we help organizations with. This in itself centers around things like the security of the device, what you need on, what you need off, and so on and so on. Give you a sort of high level example. We worked with an organization not that long ago that as a hard requirement needed to restrict the use of the camera on the phone. The individuals were working with vulnerable human beings and wanted to mitigate that as much as possible. So you could then start to wrap in device-based policy settings to make sure that's off and on in certain circumstances, depending on what you need to. It also lends itself quite nicely to protecting things like data. The end-to-end device onboarding experience, again, is something that Leon talked about earlier. Are you part of a sort of enrollment program? Do you need support in making sure that devices purchased from your manufacturer are automatically enrolled into your service? We talked about DEP earlier. The Android side of things can also be mitigated with things like enrollment managers and so on. Again, careful considerations needs to be made around that to make sure that the device being onboarded is going through the right motions, so that IT happy to pass that device out, or even the end user is happy to onboard into that service, knowing everything they're going to get. User self-enrollment is also a big thing we're seeing as part of this as well, right? We talked earlier about the things around BYOD. Wrapping the relevant security around applications is going to be critical. So a common scenario, you might have seen the videos, everyone talks about it. You can, for example, take something like the Outlook app and protect data within that bubble so end users can't transfer things to WhatsApp or Twitter or social media and so on, and force any syncing or applications that do need to download files relevant to support naturally are only storing those levels of information in one place, OneDrive, for example. Additional, providing things like file-based security. We talked about this a lot. Things like encryption on the device is very, very important, making sure that data is protected. As we talked about earlier, that periphery that you need to protect is now the file itself. The device needs protection naturally, but the company data, the real valuable part of that, could be in the form of files and information as opposed to the device. And then towards the tail end of that, everyone's now in the process of going towards a security framework. Cyber Essentials Plus is very hot right now. We've worked with organizations around the NIST framework, NCSE guidance. All of these things needs to be adhered to when we're applying consultancy-led engagements, specifically around things like security, to make sure internal compliance is checked, make sure everything we need to do from an internal perspective is done, as well as then anything regulatory or business requirements wise, to make sure that if you are supplying a resource to another organization, they adhere to all of the relevant security standards as part of that. So that's very much a consultancy-led engagement. One of the other areas we can help with is we have smart teaming. So our smart teaming service is designed to effectively cater for and manage that whole sort of device journey Leon showed you higher up. So in terms of the support and the sort of remit of this particular service, we help organizations get their relevant corporate and BY devices up to scratch, configured, and delivering the services they want them to be delivered to end users. In conjunction with that, we also make sure things are very, very procedural driven. We want to make sure the adoption of either corporate devices and or BYOD devices for end users are very straightforward, very, very well sort of methodically thought out to make sure that anything from an onboarding perspective is smooth. It's not too passive. You get sort of good sort of flow of information into the organization as quickly as possible, and making sure people are obviously productive. In conjunction with that, again, coming back to productivity, making sure that the services, the apps, and everything you want to provide to end users to keep them productive is all there ready to go. And we do some really, really good work around things like application profiling around that to make sure that the relevant department gets the relevant apps specific to their role. So we do like to be precise in this measure to maximize things like productivity, as well as then the onboarding side of things as well. Everything we do is centered around things like security, making sure that we protect the data on the device from accidental leaks, as well as in the file itself to make sure that it's in a location we're happy to support as an IT team. Your IT team, as a matter of fact, is of high importance, as well as in making sure that from a device configuration perspective, we take care of all the common security frameworks organizations like to work with, Cyber Essentials, the NCSE guidance, etc., etc. And then towards the tail end of that, one thing that's often forgotten is that your devices, your iPhones, your Android devices, your iPads, they need software updates in the same way that your Windows devices have. So making sure that those things are scheduled, well thought out, and not too disruptive to end users is obviously of high importance. Very important to things like security, as well as then productivity, and then naturally helping any bug fixes along the way as they're released by the manufacturer. So in a nutshell, it's designed to automate the management of the mobile and application deployment process within your business. So with all of these things coupled in, if we look at things from a consultancy perspective, as well as then from the sort of smart teaming perspective, which is a managed service offering, what are some of the benefits that's typically unlocked with this? So here's one of the things we strive for a lot of the time. So one of the biggest things we need to make sure is at the forefront of everything we do, and that is to reduce effort. The reason you want to work with a partner such as Power On Platforms is to make sure things happen methodically. You want to get end users' devices as quickly as possible. So choosing the right partner for that is of critical importance. We also want to make sure that we provide that boost or that maintenance of things like productivity. Empowering end users these days, specifically around things like the millennial generation, is a really important thing. 95% of sort of the professional services arms within the sort of London space, for example, are finding massive boosts in productivity around things such as self-service. These days, end users want to be able to access things at will, on command, whenever they feel like it. So being able to provide them that level of capability means you're reducing the strain internally in terms of things like the help desk, as well as in IT resources accordingly. Naturally, we talked about things like the security platform. We want to make sure things are secure, up to date, safe, as well as then making sure that anything from a data perspective is well protected and obviously managed. Also then simplify the whole process and the engagement. So making sure that things aren't easy, but definitely simplified. So we take very complicated motions and so on, reduce those down into their component parts to then obviously then drive towards a cloud offering to make the organization itself future-proof. So what we mean by that is you can then look to expand that cloud offering. 9 times out of 10, if we're talking about things like Intune, let's expand those capabilities to go towards the desktop, as well as then things like conditional access, Azure Active Directory, and so on, to provide a real secure and robust service all round. We did have some questions pop in. What we're going to do is, in the interest of time, is we'll respond to those directly. So if you do have anything in the meantime, there's also some information available on things like our website. If you have any additional questions beyond what was asked today, please email them in to info@Power-On-Platforms, get in touch with your account manager, or feel free to reach out to myself and Leon directly. We're on LinkedIn, as well as things like Twitter as well, and all the information is naturally supplied on the website. And for those of you a bit more old school, there's a telephone number. I dare you to call it. So anything else, please get in touch. But thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, everyone.